Rockstar Games is known for crafting massive, detailed open worlds packed with tons of things to do. Their biggest hits, Grand Theft Auto 5 and Red Dead Redemption 2, continue to set the bar for open world gaming. But nearly 15 years ago, we were first introduced to John Marston in the original Red Dead Redemption on PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. And at the end of last year, this game finally made its way to PC. I've been playing Red Dead Redemption on my OLED for the past few weeks now, and today we're answering one big question: should you play it on Steam Deck? So we're going to dive right in then, and first of all, there's something that I wanted to address right away, something that I wasn't aware of when I first started making this video. So I was under the impression that the modern releases of Red Dead Redemption on PlayStation, Xbox, and then PC, I thought they'd undergone a small amount of visual upgrades. However, it turns out that's not the case at all. Texture-wise, everything is very similar. The PC version does have support for a few extra features, such as FSR 3.0, which we can make use of, but other than that, it's just support for things like 4K and ultra-wide resolution, which we're not going to be able to utilize on a Steam Deck. I'll come back to this later on in the video because I think it does affect the value here, but just know that essentially this game is not a remake, it's not a remaster, it is just essentially a port with a few extra features. Okay, so let's get technical. I've not included this in my videos in the past, but I had the idea recently that it might be useful for you guys to know the file size of the game. So Red Dead Redemption takes up 9.43 gigabytes of space on my Steam Deck, so it's a pretty small game. It doesn't take very long to install, and you can still fit plenty of other titles on your internal drive. When you first start the game, you are greeted by Rockstar's Launcher. Now, I've covered various launchers on this channel in the past. Ubisoft has one of the worst. CD Projekt Red has one of the best. I would say that the Rockstar Launcher is somewhere in between these. It's a bit of a pain to set up initially. The touchscreen controls don't work very well with the Rockstar Launcher, and I'd actually recommend, if you can, set up your account on another device. So that's the bit that's kind of annoying, but the good thing about the Rockstar Launcher is that this is just a one-time process. So I installed the game weeks ago now, and I only had to log in a single time right at the start. I've never had to repeat that process. It remembers you, and it takes you into the game without any additional input, but it does take quite a long time to get through all the stages of the launcher, but you know, after the first time, it's just a case of launch the game and wait, no input needed. So once we're actually in the game, how does Red Dead Redemption run? Well, if you remember, I mentioned that it's not really had any kind of remake or remastered treatment. That means that we're not really worried about how the game can run on Steam Deck, and it more becomes a personal preference. Do you prefer having a low performance and better detailed graphics, or lower graphics and, you know, a more of a focus on frame rate? So I spent most of my time playing on the high preset, and anyone who's not sure, I would just recommend that you start here and see how you find it. You very often are at 60 frames per second on these settings. It does move around that 60 mark from time to time, sometimes a little below, sometimes a little above. It's pretty consistent though, and when in cutscenes this goes even higher. So my recordings are obviously capped because they go through the capture card, but on the OLED when playing handheld, I've seen, you know, between 70 and 80 frames at times during cutscenes. The game runs very smoothly on these settings. It looks good. There's not really a lot to dislike here. The fan is pretty quiet, but it does seem to kick in more during stormy weather. Other than that though, I didn't find it too annoying. And on these settings, you're getting around 2.5 hours of battery life as well. I did kind of think it would be a little higher, but you know, 2.5 is still pretty good. I was fine with that. So I think that high preset works really well. I'd say start there and see what you think. And from that point, it really just is up to you. Would you like to tweak things? Are you happy with how they are? Or do you want to sort of try and get either a higher frame rate or more detailed graphics when you're playing the game? I tried playing on the ultra graphic settings, and again this runs well, but you're now on the other side of that 60 frames per second mark. It doesn't often reach 60. It tends to sit somewhere between 45 and 55 frames. So if you wanted, you could pick this preset and limit the Steam Deck refresh rate to 45 Hertz. I think that would work pretty well. It would be a good way to play. And then on the other side, the more you lower the graphic settings, the closer to 90 frames per second on the Steam Deck OLED you get. Although I did notice that even on the lower settings, you mostly hover in the high 80s. It's never quite a locked 90, but it does get pretty close. On an OLED, all of these options are available to you. There's a reason to go for all of these because you can go up to 90 frames. If you've just got an LCD Steam Deck, there's probably not much of a reason to take it too far below high or medium settings because you're not going to be able to benefit from those extra frames. Now, being an older game, it is a bit harder to see the difference in these graphic settings, particularly in the characters. I tend to find they look similar across the different graphic settings, and if you're speeding along on a horse, will you really notice? Like I said, I stuck to high settings because it was a good balance. The game does now have FSR 3.0, but you don't really notice it kicking in very much, or at least I didn't notice it kicking in. Overall, I just didn't really feel like pushing for either a higher frame rate or better textures added too much to Red Dead Redemption, and so that's why I stuck somewhere in the middle. But play with it, have a go, see which graphics settings you like. They all run really well. Now, there's some good news if you like to play your Steam Deck docked, maybe on a big television or an external monitor or something like that. This game is one that you can add to the list for 1080p gameplay. I tested this out first on high settings again that I've been playing on already, and it usually runs between 30 and 45 frames per second on these settings depending on what's happening around you. I think this is pretty good, but if you want even more frames, then turn the graphics down. If you go all the way down to low, then it's consistently much higher. It's not quite a locked in 60, but it is much smoother. And just generally overall, if you compare this to the original releases on PS3 and Xbox 360, then it kind of still runs better than those did. And of course, with the Steam Deck, you have the option to play both handheld and then also play 1080p on your TV. So I actually think this is a great title for the Steam Deck, and I think you'll have a perfectly good time with it if you like to play docked. One thing to bear in mind though, which now seems to be cropping up more and more, if you're playing the game using an external controller and put the Steam Deck to sleep, when you wake it up again, the game won't read the input from the native controls until you change the controller order. I swear this didn't used to happen as much, but now it feels like every video I make about a game on Steam Deck, I'm having to say this about the controllers. So I'm not sure if it's just that I'm not remembering right, or if something has changed and it is happening more frequently now. I think it would be a great idea for Valve or someone in the community to create a way that when you launch a game from sleep, the Steam Deck identifies if an external controller is connected or not, and it sets the game to the appropriate controls automatically. Maybe it's not possible, but if Valve don't want to make it, maybe somebody can make a plugin. I don't know. I just think that would be a great idea. Speaking of sleep mode though, other than that minor issue with swapping controllers, I do actually think that sleep mode is very useful in Red Dead Redemption, and there's two reasons for that. Firstly, I mentioned that the launcher takes a while to get through, but even once the game has launched, once you pass the launcher, there's still actually quite a lot of loading screens and stuff to get through before you even reach the menu, and unfortunately there's no way to skip it. Once you're in game, loading times aren't huge, but being able to just wake the game up and skip that launcher, skip all that initial loading, does save a decent amount of time. The second reason is that this game has quite a lot of talking cutscenes and sections of quest lines where you can't save. This is a bit of a pet peeve of mine. I don't like it when games do this, but it's an older title, so I'll let it off. And here the Steam Deck allows you to stop playing no matter what's happening and then pick it back up later at the exact same point when it's more convenient for you. One of the last things that I want to talk about is the audio in Red Dead Redemption. Now, most of the time the audio is absolutely fine, but occasionally I have noticed that when things can get really loud, so an example is shooting and yelling at the same time, you do sometimes get a fair bit of audio crackling. It doesn't happen every time things get loud, but when it does last for, a little while. I'm guessing this is maybe something that's been around since the initial release, and because there were no improvements made to the game, it's sort of carried through to this release. I don't think it's the Steam Deck speakers, because it also happened when I played docked, and I haven't found it in any other games. It didn't spoil the experience for me, but it was there from time to time. So that is the technical section of the video pretty much wrapped up. Red Dead Redemption runs really well on Steam Deck, and I think that the sleep function of the Steam Deck works really well, in particular with this game. I didn't touch on controls just because they're absolutely fine, no issues playing on the handheld, and even though the port happened less than 6 months ago, we are essentially playing a game from 2 generations ago, and older games are an area where the deck really shines, so you have no problems running this game. So is Red Dead Redemption any fun to play? Well, to give you a bit more context for the second half of this video and a better idea of where I'm coming from, I have actually never really dived that deeply into any of Rockstar's games before. I've played chunks of some of the GTA games, but never more than probably 5 to 10 hours. I think the one I spent the most time in was GTA 4, and that was just messing around online with my brother, just like chasing cars around with each other. And then the same is kind of true of the Red Dead Redemption series. I didn't play the original game when it first came out, and I did play Red Dead 2 around release, but I didn't get on with it too much, and I only then tried number 1 last year when I picked up on PS3, but the performance meant that I didn't play it for very long. The reason that I struggled with Red Dead 2 was the pacing. Everything seemed to take a long time, and now I fully understand that it's this crazy immersive world that you leisurely play and you get lost in, but it just didn't really click with me. Red Dead Redemption is not my favorite game that I have played for a video for this channel, but at this point I have sunk a fair few hours into it, And if I was to sum it up in one sentence, I think I would say that it's mostly faster paced than Red Dead 2, but the trade-off for that is that it lacks some of the depth that that game has, and there are some times when I think you can tell that it's a 15-year-old game. So in Red Dead Redemption, you play as John Marston, an outlaw who has come to town because he's been charged with clearing up some of the Wild West's worst. The initial encounter doesn't go well for you, and from there you slowly make collections in this new land to help achieve this goal, and you learn more about Marston's past and his connection with these outlaws along the way. If you're familiar with Red Dead 2, this game is actually set afterwards. They came out in opposite order on the timeline. Having played a little bit of the more recent game, I did know some of the names, but I think that anyone who got really into the second game but for some reason hasn't played this yet will probably feel quite at home. The moment-to-moment gameplay is a mix of gunslinging, horse riding, there's some time spent in minigames and doing optional extras. I liked it enough. It's fun even if it's not too deep. You've got a range of guns to choose from, a lasso, close combat, and you do spend quite a lot of time in this game riding around on your horse. The fast traveling is limited. You can only go to certain places and only at certain times. So for example, if you're camped or taking a stagecoach, but luckily controlling your horse is nice and easy. So once you sort of get used to the fact that you might have to travel a little bit of a distance, then you're absolutely fine. I mentioned each activity is not too in depth, but the longer you play the game, the more options there are that open up. At first you're just taking quests from 1 or 2 characters, but after 5-10 hours, more of these start to open up. There's gambling games like poker and dice. You can take on bounties, you can break in horses. One of my favorite activities is the night watch, where you patrol one of the ranches at night alongside a watchdog and you take care of anything that it sniffs out. There's enough variety in all the different activities that I had fun, but there's not much in the way of progression in any area. You can buy a few things from the shop that are sort of a bit progression-y, like an upgraded campsite, or you can get different guns and different horses, but there's nothing too crazy. I'm not quite sure how much that changes with Red Dead 2, but it did feel a little bit like it was missing from this game, although it might just be a sort of a sign of the times that the game was originally released in. It's not an RPG, and I know that. I just like to have something to work towards, and a lot of modern open world games do usually have some kind of progression here, even when they're not RPGs, and I think I would have enjoyed it more with a little bit of progression, but like I say, it's from 15 years ago, so I can't hold it against the game too much. Now, the world does have random encounters that can be pretty interesting. Sometimes people run up to you and say they've just been robbed, or you'll see a fight happening in town and you can choose to jump in or not. I do usually go and get involved in everything just for that variety, although it's not always obvious who is good and who isn't good. One time early on, there were some people being chased with guns, and I just immediately went for the ones doing the chasing, the ones that had the guns, but it turned out the person that I tied up was actually the sheriff, and he must have been chasing some escaped outlaws or something like that. It wasn't obvious to me. I got a bounty on my head for that. I did enjoy the classic duels that you can have in town, but unfortunately because of the random nature of these appearing, I didn't manage to get any footage of this, but they did make me laugh though, because it always seems like everyone around is watching you, and then when you win the duel, obviously your opponent is dead and everybody runs off screaming as if they didn't expect that to happen, which always makes me laugh. Where I think the game shines the most is in the writing and the characters, especially some of the side missions and the stranger quests. There's loads of interesting people to bump into. I mentioned in the first half of the video that there's lots of talking cutscenes. I have found that I am interested in these almost all the time. There's some wacky people, there's some people that you're really sympathetic towards, there's some people that you slowly warm up to, some that you take a dislike to immediately. Even though I've not played a lot of Rockstar's games, I've always heard they do good character work, and that's definitely true here as well. The stranger quests are not main missions, but they are question mark icons that appear from time to time on the map. They're a longer series of missions, but they're broken up, so you don't get the whole thing in one go, you just get pieces bit by bit, with new ones appearing as you go through the main story. And again, I found these really interesting. You get to see just enough that you want to know what happens next. It's not frustrating though, it's more like you wrap up what it is that you've done, and then there's just enough left to sort of hook you in and make you look forward to the next time that this character appears, and you know that you'll be revisiting the quest line soon, and you're happy about that. I will say though that these stranger missions can sometimes end really abruptly, like at points that I wasn't quite expecting them to, which again may just be because it's older. At one point there was a guy who I took down, and I thought maybe I would end up taking him to the jail, but you just kind of leave him once you found him, and you don't really there's no follow-up or consequences to it. But apart from that, the stranger missions were very interesting. Sometimes I found them more interesting than the main story. They're either very wacky, or sometimes they're really mysterious, so I enjoyed these a lot. Finally, the PC version does come with the Undead Nightmare expansion. I only played a little bit of this, but if you're after more content, it's there as well. This is a bit of a horror spin on the game. It's a little bit more survival-like, at least I found it that way at first. There's a lot less ammo, so you sort of have to think about what you're going to do with it. So that kind of leads me nicely on to this part of the video. I wanted to talk about the value that you're getting by buying this game. Red Dead Redemption launched for £40 here in the UK, $50 in the US. Now, between both the base game and the expansion, there is a lot of gameplay here. There's a lot to do, but considering it's pretty much just a straight re-release with very little in the way of upgrades, I think the price is still a little bit steep. Rockstar must be confident that enough people will buy at that price, but I just think it's a shame that they didn't do any kind of enhancements at all for the money that they're asking for the game. I knew that I wanted to make this video, so I wanted to buy this game at some point, but I still waited for a slight sale at the end of January. I think it was about 20% off. If you're a huge fan of Red Dead 2 and you really want to play this, then I don't necessarily think you'd be disappointed with the price that you paid. It's just that on the whole, I don't think that the current full price is a great deal for what is just a port with a few extra features of a 15-year-old game. If it had a bit of a remaster treatment, then maybe that would be different, but just what we've got for the price they're asking, I'm not quite sure those match up. So hopefully I have helped you to answer the question, should you play Red Dead Redemption on Steam Deck? The game runs extremely well on this handheld, and while I found it to be lacking depth a little bit due to its age, there's still plenty of fun to be had with this one if you're looking for a sort of cowboy Wild West style of game. Please let me know down in the comments what you think of this game. Will you pick it up, or have you been playing it already and are you enjoying it? I hope you found this video useful. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.